Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is Liza Ryan on ThinkTech Global, and today we're joining Grace Newman from Street Child in Sierra Leone over Skype. Grace, welcome.
Hi, thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and currently you're not joining us from Sierra Leone, but you're in California at the moment.
Yes, I'm at home in California. I just got here about 5-6 days ago. Okay. I arrived.
And therefore the internet connection's a little bit better.
Yeah, makes it possible, yes.
So, Grace, you work with an organization in Sierra Leone called Street Child, and you started there about a little over 2 years ago in March 2013?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's correct.
So yeah, sorry, continue.
No, yeah, that's right. I've been in Sierra Leone for nearly 3.5 years, but I've been with Street Child for just over 2 of those years.
Now, Street Child is an organization that is actually a UK-based charity, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And
it's a UK-based charity. Is Street Child UK, and we work through a local organization that's kind of co-branded, also called Street Child. And I'm the only permanent member of staff in Sierra Leone that is not Sierra Leonean. So actually all of our staff the whole program is locally led, locally run by Sierra Leoneans.
Okay, and your function there is as a senior program manager.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Now,
so I kind of work on some of the day-to-day, everything from little program management things that come up day to day, but also reporting on some of our larger programs to make sure that the donors have all the information that they need about what's happening on the ground.
Now, to put this in a little bit of context, we're so quick to forget about what has happened globally and internationally. Last year at this time, we were very much discussing, and all over the news was Ebola and the Ebola virus crisis that was in West Africa. And the organization that you work with Street Child, aims at bringing educational opportunities to vulnerable children in West Africa. And namely that, and you've expanded from 2008, I see that you guys were only working with about 100 children in the northern part of the country, and now you're working with 20,000 urban and rural children. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about what your organization does and how it was affected by the Ebola crisis. But maybe first we can talk a little bit about the mandate of Street Child and what it's doing on the ground in West Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's a pretty good overview. So we began in 2008, like you noted, in a single town with a program for 100 street-connected children, with a goal to rehabilitate those children, help to reintegrate them into safe and stable family living environments. Because a lot of times there's a variety of social factors or factors, financial factors that have driven children to whatever situation that they're in presently, which means that they're not accessing their right to basic education. And so the goal of Street Child is always to find ways to break down those barriers and to make sure that children are in safe and stable living environments and accessing that right. And so for us, that usually means having teams of social workers, and we've grown from that single program in that single town called McKinney in northern Sierra Leone to a nationwide platform where we're now in every major town and quite a lot of rural areas actually as well, where we have teams
now
identify there.
Okay, yeah. So just having a little bit of a problem with the Skype at the moment, but something that needs to be noted about Sierra Leone and that most would not necessarily understand is that Sierra Leone was also devastated by a civil war, ending just over 10 years ago, correct, Grace?
Yeah, that's right. So the conflict, sorry about that Skype problem, hopefully that's happens, but the conflict in Sierra Leone began from 1992 to 2002, and there's a peaceful resolution in 2002. it was mostly a conflict of economic nature. So actually, when the conflict was resolved, Sierra Leone went back to peace quite quickly. And so, as compared to other post-conflict states that I've been in, Sierra Leone feels now very, very peaceful. There's not kind of leftover tension, but there is a lot of leftover devastation and a lot of leftover economic consequences, as you would expect to find in a post-conflict, already very poor nation.
And this is, did the founder who began in 2008, were they specifically focused on Sierra Leone? Was it because of the post-conflict situation, or what did the educational environment look like in the country at that time?
Well, Tom Dannett is the name of the founder of Street Child UK, and he came to Sierra Leone very much with the intent, he was drawn to Sierra Leone as a place with some of the worst child development indicators in the world. And that's still the case, though it is getting better. At the time that Tom first came to Sierra Leone, they had the worst under 5 mortality rate for children anywhere, among lots of other terrible indicators that you can measure poverty and human development and childhood development. And so he wanted to start particularly in the country that was the furthest behind was his goal. And so he came to Sierra Leone, and he met Kelpa Kagbo, who's the director of Street Child of Sierra Leone. And Kelpa was involved in another organization at the time, a child protection organization. Essentially, the two of them started out Street Child together, Kelpa building the team in Sierra Leone, and Tom building the fundraising base and kind of the program directing base in the UK. But the whole operation in Sierra Leone is, as I mentioned before, run by Sierra Leoneans, and really the work is a testament to having a really, really strong team of local members of staff who understand the issues that are being faced by the children of Sierra Leone and understanding really good ways to be able to address those issues.
Now this is not your first, you've been working in Africa in different parts since you were a teenager. And it wasn't also, you didn't go to Sierra Leone in the first place to work with Street Child. You were working with another company that was also looking at issues of major infrastructure called Jewel Africa. What was it that drew you to working in a nation like this?
Well, it's a good question, actually. I think the first time I went to Africa, as you mentioned, I was a teenager, and I think I'd been fortunate and traveled a decent amount, so I was familiar with what it was like to travel and with working cross-culturally a little bit. I think the first time I went to Africa, I did a trip to Kenya as a teenager, and was really just struck by how much joy people had in the midst of so much hardship and devastation, and really thought that it was an amazing place. I wanted to spend more time and learn from people, just that people could be so happy having so little. At least was my perspective at the time, and that kind of just started a lifelong interest and passion in issues that people face, and in ways to really impact society and impact infrastructure development and other forms of human development in the developing world. And then I went on and studied international development at university, and took a role, as you mentioned, managing corporate social responsibility for an alternative energy developer, which sort of was approaching things from a different direction than how I am at the moment. But Jewel Africa, as an alternative energy developer, I managed corporate social responsibility for them. And it was really amazing, actually, to look at issues of major infrastructure development and interacting with national governments and trying to do it in the most responsible way possible. And that's how I first found myself in Sierra Leone full-time, and that's also how I first found myself interacting with Street Child.
Now going back to
running our education programs.
Now going back to your work with Street Child there, I've seen through a couple of our conversations and some of the press that's out there, this is a rather large organization. Sierra Leone is not a very large country. To what type of effect, how influential do you think that Street Child is being on the ground?
Well, I can tell you that, I guess we haven't even really gotten to speaking about Ebola yet, but the issue of out-of-school children of primary age in Sierra Leone is
Sorry, Grace, you're breaking up a little bit. At the time, we'll see if this connection comes back. In the meantime, looking at Street Child from the outside is an organization that has been able to provide relief and working with children who do not have access to education. And at this moment, we're just going to go to commercial, and when we come back, we'll speak more with Grace.
To Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy on Wednesday, and we have Sharon Moriwaki, my co-host and co-chair of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, and we have Warren Bohlmeyer today, a special guest with the Hawaii Renewable Energy Alliance, and also a member of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum.
In fact, he's our Renewable Energy Working Group Chair. So
he
takes care of all of our...
You ought to see him in song and dance, too. He does the musical part of the show. Sharon is more serious than that, but not much more serious. So anyway, what do you think of this show? I mean, is this good?
I think this is good. We hope it's good. We hope it attracts a lot more people than our forum, so that people can see what's going on in energy and clean energy, and call in, write in, tweet,
yeah, we
or
want
Twitter.
that. We want public engagement, civic engagement from everybody, because that's the only way we're going to get down the road on this, right, Warren?
Yeah, I think so, and it's an opportunity for guys like me to share a little bit of their mana'o and sometimes get the facts right. Who was that guy that said, just give me the facts, you know, start with the facts and then work from there? Oh, it was Dragnet guy, right?
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
Jack,
That was what I was
Jack
just
Man.
I was just
I
in
would
grade
all
school then. I
remember
barely
that.
remember that.
Yeah.
just the facts,
Just the
man.
man.
Here on Hawaii, the
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Leatham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Thank you for joining us again. This is Liza Ryan with ThinkTech Global, and we are talking to Grace Newman from Street Child, a UK-based charity in Sierra Leone that works with providing educational opportunities for children and was deeply involved in working in Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis. Grace, thanks for being with us.
Yes, thanks very much.
So before we went to break, we were talking a little bit more on the background of Street Child, and I think in order to really get the perspective and to understand why something like this is necessary, it's important to understand the history of Sierra Leone. And we discussed briefly about the Civil War and the impact that that had on the society as a whole and rebuilding, and also the need for infrastructure. Now, when you came into Sierra Leone, you were in a different position with a different alternative energy company and then switched over to Street Child. What was it for you that was compelling about what they were doing?
Well, as I mentioned previously, the fact that the organization is actually run by Sierra Leoneans makes a huge difference. I've always been interested in the nonprofit sector, and making the move across from for-profit to nonprofit for me was a natural move, but it was also very inspirational to see the way that the organization utilizes local staff and local competencies to address issues that Sierra Leoneans are facing, and that it seemed like an effective tool. Yeah, it was very compelling, and I was excited to join the team.
So how many local staff are you working with, and then what is that involvement? When you say you're working on the ground as a grassroots organization, what does that look like on an average day?
Great question. So we have a presence in every district in Sierra Leone, in every major town. We have approximately, it's nearly 300 members of social work and livelihood staff, which are sort of the core staff that are delivering the work that we're doing with the children on a day-to-day basis. We also work with about 450 teachers that we have on our payroll, and additionally there's a large number of support staff, everyone from drivers down the line. So we're employing close to, I think, plus the teachers, close to 600 staff plus 400 teachers. So it's nearly 1,000 Sierra Leoneans on the payroll. So it is actually a pretty large footprint. And the way the staff interact with the children has a lot to do with the fact that that it's a sustainable, locally led and locally driven model.
And so with so many staff and as a charity, where does that funding come from?
The majority of our funding, there's a few sources. We're working on 4 different projects that are funded by DFID, the Department for International Development, which is the UK's government money. There are 4 different programs that we're running for them. Additionally, we run our own fundraising appeals, mostly in the UK, and there's individual donors that have been very generous, as well as we work with trusts and foundations delivering several different programs. We're beginning a program right now that's funded by WFP and WHH, World Hunger Peace, which is the German organization. So really, there's been a lot of partnership and collaboration with various organizations on the ground.
And part of that is that also part of Street Child's work is trying to create sustainable funding through your commercial activities. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So there's also another funding source, which I didn't mention, but yes, another funding source is called Street Child Commercial. It's a separate organization that was founded in Sierra Leone as well to run alongside of the programs, and it's a way to raise money in country and a way to help to make the programs more self-sustaining inside of Sierra Leone. And that's done by Street Child Commercial, runs a number of different shops and bars, mostly on the mining sites that So it's a way of making sure that the investment that corporations are making in Sierra Leone is also that in addition to having the large-scale investment in infrastructure, also that their purchases of wine and beer and candy bars, etc., are also going to impact the children in Sierra Leone.
Now, who are these children? When we talk about street children, why is this a major issue in Sierra Leone? Are these orphans? Are these children who lack enough care from their caregiver? Why? Explain a little bit about what that scenario for your quote-unquote street child is.
Absolutely. So, it's a good question. I guess first thing to understand would be that Street Child began working exclusively with street children, but has actually grown since that initial focus to encompass other children who are vulnerable and who are not accessing the right to education. So we're now working with a broader spectrum of children. However, street children are a large issue in Sierra Leone. There's about 50,000 children that have been identified as being street connected is the official terminology, which means that they're dependent in some way on the street for their survival. Some of them actually live full time on the street, don't have homes to go to, but others maybe float in between homes or don't have stable living situations. And many, if not all of them, work on the street day to day as little peddlers, petty traders. In Sierra Leone, a lot of this will have to do with migratory patterns, or perhaps it might be a story we hear frequently is children who are raised in more rural areas and aren't able to finish school, or perhaps they finish the highest level of school that's available to them where they are, and their families actually might even think that they're sending them to better opportunities by sending them to the city. But something doesn't work out, maybe the aunt that they went to live with isn't able to care for them adequately, or they never get enrolled into school where in the place that they moved to, and so they wind up dropping out and living on the street and fending for themselves. So our teams of social workers meet the children in these situations in urban areas and help to make sure that they're enrolled in school, that they return to school, and that they're in safe and stable environments moving forward. But this has also driven us to actually work more in rural areas to try to stop the migration where possible by investing in school infrastructure and improving child protection networks in more rural areas as well.
Now, is this educational infrastructure something that is just lacking wholesale in Sierra Leone, or are there any other protective services that you are working with?
We work very closely with the Ministry of Social Welfare, also with the Ministry of Education, and with a number of other nonprofit organizations. We're not the only ones, but there was a study in 2012 that estimated 230,000 primary school-age children were out of school. As you noted previously, Street Child's working with a really large number of those children now, and making sure that they are enrolled in school. I think the number you quoted earlier was 20,000. We've actually worked with quite a lot in the last year or so since that number was updated. It's probably much closer to 30,000 now that we're working with, and making sure that they're enrolled in school, enrolled in education, and accessing that right and have adequate protection services around them.
So putting that in context, then what is the population of Sierra Leone?
It's about 6 million.
Okay. And so when we're looking at 230,000 children out of school?
Out of school, yeah, that's right.
Out of primary school.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a staggering number. And definitely an issue that, now a lot of these children are not necessarily, like you said, they're not necessarily orphans in that they don't have parents or a caregiver. Is there a cultural aspect to children not being in school?
Well, I think coming out of the conflict for any society, a 10-year conflict where essentially infrastructure was shut down for a lot of that time, there would certainly be a cultural aspect where it almost breaks the habit of school going. If your parents weren't educated, it's less likely that you'll be educated, and that's true anywhere. So there's a lot of things in Sierra Leone's history that have led it to be in the place that it is now. But we're seeing some really positive changes, and especially where prior to the Ebola outbreak, unfortunately, it's been really devastating. The way that Ebola has impacted the types of gains that Sierra Leone has been experiencing over the last 5 or 10 years have been really impressive. Last year, for example, Sierra Leone was projected to have the second fastest growing economy in the world. They were projected at 11.4% GDP growth. Staggering figure. Unfortunately, in the end, the Ebola crisis began midway through the year, so they didn't actually achieve that figure.
Now, what was driving that increase?
Mostly investment in the mining and mineral extractive resources sector of the economy, but also there's more happening in agricultural exports, specifically palm oil. Is also a really important aspect of things that's happening for Sierra Leone.
Okay, now so maybe we can switch gears a little bit, and because your job changed in the middle of your work there, didn't it?
Dramatically, yes.
You started working with Street Child as in a sense as a program manager and traveling to these different areas and working and setting up the infrastructure. And part of the work that Street Child does is not just, you do build some buildings, correct?
Yeah, we do some school building, especially in rural areas where there weren't schools at all previously. Again, to help to try to curb some of this migration that I was speaking about previously.
And then those schools don't only just serve as, during the school hours, but also as community centers.
Yeah, especially some of them more than others. But yeah, we will use them as hubs, meeting places, to run seminars, and yes, absolutely, training centers.
Now then all of this changed dramatically. about a little over a year ago.
Yeah, so on May 26th of last year, May 26th, 2014, the first case of Ebola was reported in Sierra Leone. It had been in Guinea and Liberia for a few months before that. But yeah, just nearly exactly a year ago was when we first started hearing confirmed reports of Ebola having come across the border into Sierra Leone.
And so as that happened, what was the initial response? I mean, in about mid-June, the international media was starting to cover it. But obviously, you were on the ground and working in these communities. What did it look like before we saw all of these, we got the statistics here on American and international news?
I think to begin with, there was sort of probably an ill-conceived hope, to be honest. Initially, the outbreak began in a very remote district called Kailam over on the Liberian and Guinea border. And to begin with, I think everyone just sort of hoped it would stay there, which of course was never going to happen, but the initial kind of efforts were to contain the virus. And I think that's the way that it's worked in the past. Outbreaks in Uganda or the Democratic Republic of Congo, they've been much more localized than our outbreak in West Africa was. And so the initial efforts were always to try to contain it the way that had been possible in other places in the past. But by the time we got to Sierra Leone, it had already spread too much. And I think there were early indications that probably weren't heeded that this virus was unlike the ones that we'd faced before. It had already spread so quickly from Guinea to Liberia and now into Sierra Leone that containment was not actually an option. So I think the initial response was definitely hoping that it just stayed there.
And then, and then we spoke sometime in June, I think, and you were back in the UK because of it, and because they had stopped sending foreign flights into Sierra Leone, into Freetown at that point in time, and your organization deemed that it was unsafe for you to be on the ground.
I think it was, close. So I actually left in July on vacation. I came home on a previously scheduled vacation. It was my mom's 50th birthday. So I came home, and then actually by the time that it was time for me to go back, which was in August, flights were being canceled, and my flight was canceled. There were some flights still, some airlines still flying. Brussels continued flying throughout the crisis. I can't give them enough credit for that, because they actually probably saved a lot of lives. But a number of airlines pulled out, and including the airline that I was flying on. And so there was definitely a phase of time where it was uncertain. My role had been to run this program having to do with out-of-school children and school enrollment, and the schools weren't reopening. So my job actually, as it had previously existed, did not any longer by fall last year.
And so then how did that shift? What did, you obviously stayed with Street Child, and now schools are reopened some 9 months after that they've been shut. But how did that shift? Obviously, when crisis strikes, whether it's a pandemic or like the earthquake in Nepal, international relief and aid and disaster organizations kind of flood in. And you've experienced that in other parts of Africa. And what did that do to Sierra Leone? And what did it do, and how did it change your job?
Well, I mean, it was a really interesting time, and it's so difficult to coordinate across organizations and across governments and with various different sensitivities that you have to be thinking about. So that it was a really large learning experience actually for me. I've not worked in a crisis environment like this before. The way things changed for Street Child was when it became clear that schools were not opening, we started immediately contacting donors to find out how much flexibility we had with our funding and if it would be possible to reprogram any of it to things that were more appropriate given the context. We received a lot of positive ability to leeway to be able to move to things that were more contextually appropriate. Mm-hmm. And we started hearing from our teams. As I mentioned, our teams are nationwide. It's all local staff, and we began receiving these notifications about children who'd been orphaned by the virus and were being left alone, were being cast out by their communities, were being stigmatized because their parents had died of Ebola and people were afraid. And so that really changed things for Street Child. When we started realizing the sort of scale that was happening on, that became a really large focus for us.
That's something I want to talk about. We're going to go to a break quickly here, Grace, but when we get back, we'll discuss the Ebola crisis and how that affected Street Child in Sierra Leone. Thank you so much. You're watching ThinkTech Hawaii.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week, we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Thank you. You're watching ThinkTech Hawaii. This is Liza Ryan, and we're talking with Grace Newman on her work with Street Child, a UK-based charity that has been working in Sierra Leone since 2008 and recently experienced the Ebola crisis. Grace, thank you again for being with us.
Absolutely.
And before we went to the break, we just briefly started talking about what the Ebola crisis did specifically for your job in the organization. And I wanted to go into this term that you quote in this report that you have on the Street Child website about Ebola orphans. Now, what's an Ebola orphan?
Well, Street Child uses the term to describe any child who's been left without their primary caregiver due to the Ebola virus. So that refers to children who've lost both their biological mother and biological father to the virus, what we more traditionally think of as an orphan. But also it includes a number of cases where a child lost one parent or the other, but nevertheless was left either alone or in an environment with insufficient care. Or it could refer to a child who was already an orphan and had been living with an alternative caregiver and then lost that caregiver to the virus. So we use a slightly broader definition of Ebola orphan because what we're really looking at is the children who are left most vulnerable. And in all of those cases, we're talking about extremely vulnerable children due to Ebola.
Now, and some of that vulnerability had to do with some of the stigmatization that went around Ebola and confusion as to how it was transmitted. And so how did that impact your work? Did it become part of the mandate of Street Child to educate, or?
Absolutely, yeah. We, early on, when we decided, and actually it was a decision. We had to think about how are we going to interact with this. Are we just going to recall all of our staff back to Freetown and hide away, or how will we interact? We're not a health organization, and the staff really were the ones to take the decision that no, we need to find the best way to do the best things for the most vulnerable children. And so once we decided that we were going to be interacting, with children who remain vulnerable by the virus actively in areas and zones of active transmission. It was the responsibility of the organization to make sure that everyone was educated. First of all of the staff, that they were all educated about how to protect themselves. We obviously couldn't send staff into an environment where they might be unsafe. So the staff were trained very early on about how to protect themselves, about what possible signs and symptoms are. And then later on, that training was actually rolled out as well to a number of our teachers, for example, that are in rural areas. We actually wound up training, we trained our 400 initially, the ones who are on Street Child's payroll, but then we actually, that worked so well that we wound up rolling it out to an additional 800 teachers. So we trained more than 1,200 rural teachers on ways to keep their community safe, and actually really saw an impact in the way that the virus spread in those areas.
Now, like you said, and there were a number of different things that came out, but Ebola didn't just have an impact on these children because of the disease itself, but also, the ramifications of transportation, in-country transportation shutting down, crops being unable to be harvested. What were the longer-term ramifications of this crisis?
I mean, I think some of that still remains to be seen. I think we'll be seeing ramifications for years to come, unfortunately. But yes, as you mentioned, districts started to be quarantined, which means that the movement in between districts in the country was slowed severely or halted. It made it difficult for farmers to get their crops to market. Just the amount of poverty that was created. There's kind of the Ebola primary. There's people actually dying or losing a caregiver, losing a spouse to the virus, which is obviously the most primary impact. But there's a lot of people who've been impacted secondarily by being impoverished, by losing their crops, not being able to sell their crops, or not being able to buy food. There's been food shortages already in some of the towns and cities, and we're not even into the leanest part of the lean season yet. So it's hunger and starvation are real issues and real risks that are happening right now. I think we'll continue to see things like that for a while. There'll be further impacts from Ebola still on that one.
And it was also a problem dealing with now, I guess, some misinformation over members of families that were close to somebody who contracted the virus. Maybe a child lost a parent, and then was there problems informing the community as to who would be safe to allow into their home? Say a child loses his mother to Ebola, and then the extended family doesn't want to bring the child into their home for fear of also contracting the disease. Was that an issue that Street Child faced on the ground?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the problems began at the outset. Even before Street Child was as heavily involved as we became as the crisis moved on. But part of the reason that the virus spread so quickly and violently is, lack of education is a real impact here. And part of the reason that the virus is spreading as rapidly as it is or was is due to the fact that people fundamentally don't understand germs. It's not a concept that they previously had. And so trying to explain to someone you can't touch them because you'll get sick, it's really difficult. And explaining what things are dangerous and what things aren't, and why someone who's symptomatic can transmit the disease, but not someone who's not symptomatic can't. It's all actually conceptually very difficult. It's easier for people with a Western education to grasp on these concepts, but it was really difficult. And so definitely part of what Street Child wound up doing was trying to make sure that people were as educated as possible about A, how to protect themselves, but B, how to make sure that there isn't unnecessary stigma. And it's a difficult line because actually there's a lot of wisdom in not letting strangers into your home and not letting, not touching your friends or your loved ones if they're symptomatic, but trying to explain what that line is. But actually, our staff were incredible at it. They were amazing in the way that they were able to negotiate those situations and navigate those situations, things that I certainly couldn't have done. But because they're Sierra Leonean, because they're from these areas, because they understand the difficulties that families are going through, we're much more capable of expressing to families how to keep themselves safe and where there is and is not danger in letting a child into their home. And so we're able to usually navigate that situation pretty well. We found safe and secure placements for the vast majority of these children.
Now, part of the outcome of the Ebola crisis was that all public places closed down, correct? And schools closed. And what was Street Child's reaction? Was there fear or trepidation, concern possibly on the part of Street Child that this was going to set back your mission further? Or what was running through your and your staff's head as schools were closed for 9 months?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was when we found out the decision had been taken. I think initially it sort of happened in phases, I guess. So initially, school reopening was delayed, and then school reopening was delayed again, and then they canceled the term, and then they canceled the next term, and so it sort of unfurled in a fashion where you didn't realize how dramatic it was to begin with. But now, if you step back and look, you're talking about a country that's, to be honest, in the bottom 10 in basically every way we know how to measure poverty and human development, literacy, educational attainment. All of these things are already, we're at such a low base, unfortunately, and due in part to the impact of the civil conflict, as you mentioned previously. And then we talk about closing schools in that country for 9 months. Schools closed in July for the rainy season, and should have reopened in late August or September, and they didn't, and they didn't reopen again until April. So that's 9 months of school closures. Basically, children in some ways missed a year of education, and now we're playing catch up. Children who are already behind the global standard, such a high percentage of the time, and to have schools closed, I mean. In 3 countries, they were closed in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. 5 million children were out of school during those school closures.
Now, part of your work has been in this school reopening process, and I'm sure part of that was, gauging whether or not it was safe for students to go back to school, and then. Because everyone was out of school, did this change the nature of your work? Normally you were working with students who presented some type of vulnerability or that were on the street and trying to get them in. And now all of students are out of school. Did this change your approach, or does this change Street Child's, the mechanisms that they used?
Yeah, so when school reopening, I guess the process sort of began, the president set school reopening as a target at the end of January this year. He set school reopening as a target for sometime in March or April. We did manage to get schools reopened on April the 15th, which was a massive achievement. But it meant so much coordination across agencies. There was a number of concerns, as you mentioned. Obviously, you don't want to reopen school. There was still active transmission of virus now, and there was in April as well, actually at higher numbers than we have presently. And so trying to find ways to make sure that we want schools reopened, we want them to open as quickly as possible. We don't want children to miss any more school than necessary, but obviously also we want to make sure that it's done in a way that's as safe as possible. So trying to make sure that all the schools have hygiene supplies, facilities for hand washing, that sort of thing, and that the teachers are trained in how to make sure that children do wash their hands and that children are spaced appropriately in a classroom and that any child who's symptomatic is kept out of school. All of that, it was a massive logistical feat. There are 8,000 schools, between 8,000 and 9,000 schools in Sierra Leone, so it was about rolling out those resources and that training to all 9,000 of those schools nationwide, which was a huge feat. But obviously very worth it. We haven't had any cases yet of Ebola in a school classroom, and obviously it would be so devastating if we did. And so it's obviously very important to make sure that those things are focused upon.
Well, that's an incredible work that Street Child is doing, and you feel that that Sierra Leone has changed for the better because of the Ebola crisis?
Wow, change for the better. I think it's been an incredibly difficult season on so many levels for so many people. There's been over 12,000 children orphaned by Ebola. There are 9 months of school closures, incredible poverty created by the crisis. The sorts of things that I think are positive changes are the agency coordination that happened in a lot of cases was really impressive. Governments had to become really integrated with nonprofit organizations and bilateral and multilateral organizations in order to fight this battle. And I think that there'll be good legacy that comes out of that. A lot of just networking that's been created amongst nonprofit organizations, ways to make sure that efforts are not duplicated, but also that there's good coverage of the important aspects of development work that different organizations are doing. All of that stuff's incredibly important, and I think that there'll be lasting legacy in those terms, which is obviously a positive for the country.
Thank you so much, Grace, for joining us today on ThinkTech Global and the work that you've been doing in Sierra Leone. We wish you well on your next, and for if you'd like to find out more information on Street Child, you can visit their website. And thank you again for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.